Lurking in the backyard of this cute and inconspicuous house is something that's been illegal since for as long as I can remember.
So I would like to discuss some political topics and also some social issues.
These things were outlawed decades ago for fear of the dire consequences that they can have on beautiful neighborhoods just like this one. This is Ann Arbor.
I really take umbrage with what zoning officials, city planners do, because I think that we have got it all wrong in this era. I know that we have gone from buggies to cars. We don't want any debt that is fueling the growth. That means that we have to pay back the debt, and what is the return do we get on it? We want slow organic growth so that when people are able to afford it, they can slowly upgrade their homes, they can tear down older buildings instead of just putting in a lot of debt, and if something does not work out, then they have to pay it back. Their whole life savings might be lost. The city zoning departments, they don't allow us to do slow incremental growth. They insist that we just build and that's it. We have to build to completion. It's nothing that we can slowly do and just work it out on our own, customize things. We always have to go through the planning department to make sure it's approved, to make sure it's safe. So one of the principles that I adhere to is that we should never think of it as we want instant completion, because we don't know where each of us are at our lives, where we might not have enough money to build a completely safe house according to them, with following all the regulations, but you know what, it's plenty safe. So to follow their guidelines, it might even actually go the other way, where they might think it's safe, but then, you've cut out creativity and innovation where people can build it another way, which makes it even safer. For example, I like to say that if we didn't have the safety belt in our cars, we would have maybe a safety device, a solution that would completely negate the reason to have safety belts. We would maybe have a foam that fills up the whole car that totally absorbs it, and there's no deaths because we can totally protect ourselves. And the car makers will never do that because they have this 50-year-old decades old technology that is supposedly saving our lives when we put on our seatbelt and click it on.
On quarter-acre lots, one sidewalk, one house, and one garage per parcel.
The owners of this place, a 4-person family led by 2 architects and professors at the University of Michigan, told us why they decided to take it upon themselves to design and build something that was so controversial in their very own backyard.
Ann Arbor has a very serious housing shortage, like many cities.
So they decided to build a little house in their backyard in order to help. It's called an accessory dwelling unit, or an ADU for short. You might know them as granny flats, or in-law housing, or coach houses. But they're all basically the same thing, a smaller, independent residential dwelling unit located in the same lot as a standalone single-family home. This one allows the owners to save for their children's college funds. But at what cost?
Residents have fought against these for years, citing their potential for it to decrease their property values and increase traffic. This little house could disrupt the tranquility of their pocket of gentility and worse, wipe away the very reason that they decided to live here in the first place.
I think it proves that it doesn't change the character, and it's quite secluded back here. You don't really see it from the street frontage, and we've doubled the number of families that can live on this one piece of land.
Even though this kind of thing is now legal to build in your backyards in Ann Arbor, its size and shape is pretty tightly regulated. This one represents the largest allowable volume by law. It can only be a maximum of 21 feet tall, and it cannot exceed 800 square feet, with Ellie and Adam's lot size of 8,300 square feet. Not only are all of these cities allowing for these kinds of constructions to be built nowadays, they're actually encouraging them.
And this represents an almost complete reversal in sentiment of city planners and local governments across the United States. But why the sudden change? To understand how we got here, I want to head back to Chicago right quick and talk a little bit about the history of ADUs and how they developed. Here in Chicago, coach houses have been around almost since the beginning of the settlement of the city. Even middle-class houses here originally had small buildings behind the main house for hay storage, for housing cows or horses and buggies.
This was a tradition that was brought over from English planning as a way of meeting your transportation and nutritional needs inside of an urban environment. It kind of reminds you just how indistinct the urban areas and rural areas may have been at the time. But think about it as having like a garage today. But the spatial needs at the time for that kind of building were more like a small barn in the city. In more affluent households, the structure may also include a small apartment for staff, like a driver or a caretaker of the animals. It was the first settlement building and built in a way that represented the extent of their budget at the time. When the family had raised more funds to be able to afford a nicer house, perhaps made out of brick, which wouldn't burn, they would move the original building to the back and build their new brick one that faces the street.
This is how America became so prosperous, because they did not have their developments funded by debt. That is one main thing. They don't have that burden to pay back the interest. So what people would do in the past, they would move to an area because maybe of the gold rush, so there's opportunities there, or they would have a farmland. They would develop their own small little main street with the small town, and then they would have perhaps some shanty buildings where they have their businesses underneath, and they live on top or at the back of the building. And as their businesses grow, they would be able to use that money, not fueled by debt, but be able to use that and then slowly remodel or make their building better and better. So incrementalism is the way to go. You know, you would try an experiment and then you learn from your mistake and you would do better. It's also called creative destruction. So if you don't have creative destruction, you have, the mega malls, you have the big box stores where they have a lot of parking, and that's all again fueled by debt. I guarantee you, no developer builds such a building without a lot of times the subsidies of the local governments, because they think they want to bring in the sales taxes. But in the end, the whole community loses because it goes out of style as it can be shown. A lot of people are going back to where they have smaller retail stores where it's more walkable. It's not somewhere you need to drive to. So things come in and out of vogue, and if you have things that are fueled by debt, it's very, very hard to recoup your money back, and all the investments that the local government has given to developers as subsidies are all wasted, and they never ever project out to how much maintenance they need to do. And also about parking regulations and how many parking spots you need for each size of a mall or an office building. It is again something that the person who owns the spot should decide. He should know that if he wants to have customers, he wants to allow for a certain number of parking. But there might be a parking area that he knows his customer can go and park and then be able to walk to his spots, to shop, to have food, to go to all the other retail stores there, or to even live upstairs. That should all be managed and thought through by the developer, because they would be the one best to know how much and how to spend their money. Sometimes there are projects that never got off the ground because they can't afford to have all these parking spots and be able to make enough money from the buildings, from the retail spaces in their small land perhaps. So you gotta let people decide for themselves, especially when it is their land, and city planners are just getting it wrong.
This rear building probably wouldn't then have been used to keep animals. Instead, it would have been used to house extended family or been rented out for the family's supplemental income.
The politicians always say that they want to help us, but I really want them to leave us alone, because I want to be able to help myself. But again, with the laws that they have, renting out, doing short-term rentals, you can't do that unless you get a license. And licenses for a libertarian is just ways of the government controlling us so that we cannot optimize our lives and make money. You know, if I have an extra spare room where I can actually rent it out and make extra, and for a lot of young families and who are in the lower brackets, if they can just make that additional income, they could use that money to make their lives better by going to school or even starting a business. All that innovation, all that possibility, all those dreams are just killed because the stupid government just says, no, you can't do that. And that is, again, not right. And how many lives have been just held back because of that? Again, regulations, as a libertarian, they don't do any good. It only helps people who have enough money maybe to lobby around those regulations, but the smaller people, they just get behind and they don't get to go ahead by being able to save money to do so.
As it became less common to keep horses and cows downtown, majority of the coach houses were converted to garage or apartments. Homeowners could make money by renting the space out, often to lower-income families. It had the effect of densifying neighborhoods without building much more than what was already there, and it created a neighborhood that accommodated a wider mixture of income levels. But by the 1950s, this increase in density and demographic and socioeconomic diversity was seen as more of a problem than an asset. Chicago's population was also in the midst of a boom, which led city officials to fear overcrowding as a potential disaster on the horizon.
I understand the concerns of the city officials because sometimes the sewer system might not be large enough to handle a lot of people in a denser area, or even there might be a water supply issue. But I still believe that people will come up with the solution if you let them be.
And by 1957, the city of Chicago banned secondary residential structures altogether. This was regulated largely through zoning restrictions that limited lots to a single dwelling unit.
I think it is just ridiculous that we can never have another city like San Francisco, New York, where we have the ability to have such dense housing buildings, and where we have retail on the ground floor. And all of these was because it was pre-zoning and people were able to optimize the area for retail downstairs and maybe live upstairs, or even just having enough, the pharmacies or grocery stores or all the essential stores where you can just walk. And the zoning departments just don't allow it anymore. But look at how expensive San Francisco is, how expensive New York is, and people love living there because they built it organically. And being organic, people were doing it because there were needs and there were wants, and they were answering that call. And when people do it slowly, in the sense where it wasn't with debt, not filled with debt, people are just building their lives and becoming more and more prosperous. And look how expensive it is right now. People want to live in these areas because they're more human scale.
Municipalities also imposed overall density restrictions that drove cities to sprawl outward rather than upward.
I have a master's in gerontology, and I did write a paper for one of my classes. And the isolation of the older generation when they live in these single-family homes, they grow old in them, it's very isolating, and it's really, really sad. I believe that function follows form. When you build a community that is just made up of single-family houses, you don't have the grocery stores nearby, you don't have small stores that you go and you pick up your dry cleaning, you run errands, you go to the shoemaker, fix your shoes. Of course, nowadays, people just throw away things. That's for another topic, which I have my thoughts on too. So it's really isolating, and that is not right. We were not meant to grow old in such a place. Like I've heard of places in Italy where the older adults come downstairs, you have enough density, you have the younger kids playing around, everybody knows everyone, and don't we all long for that?
ADUs are popping up across the country. This charge is led by places like Portland, Oregon, which grants around 300 to 500 permits for ADU construction each year.
It is so sad that cities have limited resources and the zoning departments officials are not able to approve or to look through all the plans for different upgrades and different ADUs that needs to be added, and it's just limited to a few hundred ADUs per year when there are thousands of people that have to make do with lesser housing or even paying too much. So giving people choices is what I'm all about. And when you have less regulation, people are able to be nimble about how they want to spend their money on housing. And the worst thing is, when they say they have restrictions on where people live and how you live, it's up to the individual. So I believe as a libertarian, we should always allow people to make their own choices and to adjust for themselves. Because when you're young, you might be able to live in a more crowded situation where you can save money. And when you're older, you have that money which you had to be able to work and grow and make you more money. But if you're not able to save when you're younger, that's the end of that. You have killed dreams again.
But every city has its own unique approach. In California, Los Angeles recently held a competition for architects to design a series of ADUs that are pre-approved for construction by the city. Any of these designs can just be purchased from the architect, and this process doesn't require anyone to be familiar with hiring an architect or dealing with zoning or other hassles associated with construction. Detractors of ADUs worry about the potential for them to change the character of a neighborhood or to overstress existing infrastructure. But a lot of this might come from a pretty misguided mentality. ADU construction happens slowly over time, and it's a great option for incrementally building up density.
Frédéric Bastiat is a French philosopher from the 19th century, also an economist, and he wrote the paper That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen. And what he's alluding to is, if you don't allow people, for me, how I interpret is, if you don't allow people to flourish, one way of looking at it is, then you actually don't even know what the possibilities could have been if we had not had all these regulations for zoning and we didn't have all these officials who think that they know better than the people who own the land and who wants to develop it the way they want it to organically again. And we might be so much more prosperous and we might not have all this debt that we have right now. We wouldn't even have to go through the subprime lending crisis, and imagine all those lives and all those money and resources wasted.
ADUs are an exciting reinvention of an old type. They're one of those things that we had around for a long time, but forgot about during some of the more misguided and purely automobile-focused planning efforts of the 1950s and beyond.
However, today we're beginning to recognize their benefits, while being able to control for and limit their downsides. As a unique type of building, they tend to get marred in red tape and bureaucracy as early adopters attempt to navigate their construction. But the ones that do are rewarded with a pretty flexible and relatively big bang for the buck. Over there.
As you can see, I have been taking this video from Stuart Hicks. I really like him and I do follow him on YouTube too. And again, you can imagine he's saying that it's great that we have ADUs right now being allowed in so many cities, but all these years we could have had them. And again, it's the myopic city planners who think they know better than the people who own the land. And again, the dreams, resources, lives wasted because we can't do what we want to do on our own land. Occasionally, yes, there might be somebody who might build a crazy structure on the piece of land next to your home. Again, NIMBYism, you want more rules and all that, but you just can't see what you might have gotten. When a property increases, people will tend to be more careful how they build and what they build on the land. And if not, then the next person that sees the potential will come and give a better offer and maybe purchase that land and then put that land to a better use. You have to trust the market, and then they will slowly make it and build it to the culture, to the community, and Those are the people who have boots on the ground, and it's not the city planners who think they can just do a top-down planning approach and everybody will be happier. No, actually, everybody is not happier and less prosperous, but they never seen the unseen. And unfortunately, if we continue down this road, more dreams will be suppressed and killed, and we will be less prosperous than what we would be.